morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning. We received some comments after yesterday's verdict. We will talk about, obviously, the Hunter trial. We're probably going to start with a few other things. At first, we have some New York updates. We have a couple anti-Israel protest updates. Obviously, we're going to weigh in heavily this morning on the Hunter trial. But most importantly, I want to hear your take on it, what your opinion is. If you're new to the program, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. That is the number to reach me. Leave a voicemail or a text message. The first up from last night. Good morning, Frank. Good morning. I'm sure the discussion will focus on the Hunter verdict, and while most, like myself, were probably surprised by the guilty verdict, the more I think about it, it makes perfect sense. A jury payoff to appear like it's a fair trial. The occupant of the White House can throw his son under the bus short term without a pardon to convince some he kept his word. Hunter gets bogus sentence and Trump will get prison sentence because, quote, no one is above the law. That's my fear too much. Yeah, I'm surprised by the guilty verdict myself. It was not what I expected. We're going to talk and take a look at why it seemed pretty easy to the jurors, or why that was the case. Can you imagine, though, when you think about it, just a few short months ago, there was a sweetheart plea deal in front of Hunter, and his lawyers got arrogant, they got cocky, and it was taken off the table, and now look where we are today. Also, we'll talk about the awkwardness of the first comments that Joe Biden, first public appearance, let's put it that way, that Joe Biden is forced to make. Also happens to be a gun control speech where he focuses on the responsibilities of the family. We're going to talk about that. But first, I think the biggest news of the morning, I think most of you would agree, that Joey Chestnut, American hero, is out of the 2024 Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest because he is now partnering with a vegan hot dog company. Now you're saying, Frank, why would you bring this up? Why would you start the program with Joey Chestnut? Well, first of all, some of you may remember when he was in the area a few times for a speedy eating contest. That was always fun. So he has some connections here. But also, I will say, and I say this humbly, that I had the pleasure of interviewing him probably 3 times, maybe, back in the radio days. Just something that's fascinating, become such a tradition on July 4th that it just seems almost unimaginable that Joey Chestnut will not be spending his July 4th with us in the Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest. I guess they could not reach a deal. They even offered him a Netflix deal where he could eat on Labor Day the vegan hot dogs, but he turned that down because it could not be named as something with Nathan's. A source said Chestnut was paid $200,000 a year, or I should say that again, paid $200,000 to appear in the Nathan's contest last year and was offered a $1.2 million 4-year contract going forward. Major League Eating, yes, there is an organization called Major League Eating, said in a statement, "We are devastated to learn that Joey Chestnut has chosen to represent a rival brand that sells plant-based hot dogs rather than competing in the 2024 Nathan's famous 4th of July hot dog eating contest." MLE and Nathan's went to great lengths to accommodate Joey and his management team, agreeing to the appearance fee and allowing Joey to compete in a rival unbranded hot dog eating contest on Labor Day. I'm not going to go through any more of that. I know. You're saying, why would you start the program with that? But in a year that has just been upside down, a summer, I mentioned it to you on the program yesterday, with so many historic dates, not to have Joey Chestnut in our lives on July 4th. He released a statement saying, "I was gutted to learn from the media that after 19 years, I'm banned from the Nathan's July 4th hot dog eating contest. I love competing in that event. I love celebrating America with my fans all over this great country on the 4th, and I've been training to defend my title. To set the record straight, I do not have a contract with MLE or Nathan's, and they are looking to change the rules from past years as it relates to other partners I can work with. This is apparently the basis on which I'm being banned, and it doesn't impact the July 4th event. Sadly, this is the decision Nathan's and Major League Eating are making, and it will deprive the great fans of the holiday's usual joy and entertainment. To my fans, I love you and appreciate you. Rest assured that you'll see me eat again soon. Stay hungry." All right, now there we had the breaking news. See, okay. Other breaking news. Republicans are set to expand the House majority after yesterday's victory in Ohio's special election. Republican Michael Rulli will win the special election for Ohio's 6th congressional district, helping his party expand its narrow House majority. Hey, expansion is an expansion. Rulli, a Youngstown area state senator and an executive for his family's grocery store chain, is projected to defeat Democratic Air Force veteran Michael Kripchak in the race for the sprawling district along the Ohio River in eastern Ohio. Rulli will succeed former Representative Bill Johnson, a 7-term Republican who resigned in January to become the president of Youngstown State University. All right. Whew. Look how much we cover. And it's not even it's a little over 5 minutes into the program. So I know you're going to want to comment, and I appreciate it, on Hunter Biden. We will be talking about that a little bit later on. I want to get kind of set the scene before, not everybody is up and as loyal as you right now at 6 o'clock, so I don't want to have to repeat myself later on. I think that makes for a somewhat boring show, so we are going to talk about Hunter. I think many of us were surprised, but then you take kind of a step back and look at it. For instance, and I'll probably mention this a few times during the program, but what this did is give the media the opportunity. And Stephen Collinson came in and by the way, we predicted this. Stephen Collinson came in right on duty, just ready to do this. Hunter Biden's conviction shatters Trump's persecution narrative. So because Hunter Biden got found guilty, Trump can no longer say it's a rigged system. He can no longer say they're going against him. His 34 felony counts in a heavy blue district where the judge was a Democrat donor, there's no reason to question that the validity of that trial now that Hunter Biden was charged with those 3 felonies. That is what the media will be telling you, and that's what they're already telling you, as Stephen Collinson has noted. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on as well. But that was pre-written. I mean, we could have had that ready for the media to push out before we even got the verdict, if we assumed the verdict was going to be guilty. I don't think many of us did. I am surprised. I thought it would be kind of a hung jury scenario. I was really intrigued yesterday when it was so early in the morning/afternoon, I can't remember the exact time, that I saw the breaking news that he was found, or that the verdict was in, and then that we had to wait patiently for the actual decision. So very interesting. We will be talking about it, and I'll be reading your comments throughout the morning, what you think about that verdict. You know, I always go back to, and one of the jurors I heard this morning on a news outlet, and I can't recall, I like the site where the news comes from, but they were interviewing one of the jurors, and the jurors said it was a waste of taxpayers' dollars right from the beginning. This should have just been a fine. And I thought, there's probably will be some people's mindset, but we've got to go back. And I remember we didn't bring this up specifically with former Congressman Joe Sempolinsky, but last week, as he was saying, what Trump was found guilty of, no one else would have to deal with. You or I, if we did the same thing, would not be going to a trial, would not be having 34 felony counts held against us. It just wouldn't be the case. This was, and Fareed Zakaria from CNN, many others saying it that are not Trump supporters, that would not have been a trial if the person's name wasn't Donald J. Trump. But on the other hand, if we lied on that federal background form, federal background check for a gun, rest assured we would be in serious hot water, and rest assured we would be on trial. And I think you also, to go back to Stephen Collinson's point that this shatters Trump's persecution narrative, you have to ignore the fact that Hunter Biden was offered that sweetheart plea, that his lawyers just got too big for their britches, as the saying goes, and got too cocky. So you have to ignore that plea deal to accept, pardon me, Stephen Collinson's point on that. But we're going to talk about it more in depth. When we come back, I do have just a couple quick things about this anti-Semitism, this anti-Israel protest, because there were some more terrifying updates. I know yesterday I brought to you the story about the pro-Hamas protests outside of the memorial for October 7th. some people at a protest recently saying, praising, for lack of a better word, Hitler. It's getting very, very scary. There's just a very quick few things I want to mention there. Also, we've got to talk about the border. I'm sure you've heard by now. If not, I don't want to make you nervous. But it is terrifying when 6 suspected terrorists with ISIS ties were arrested in sting operations in New York, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. And many, and I don't have the exact number here, two ICE sources confirmed to the Post they arrested the 6 people who hail from Tajikistan over the last week after the FBI contacted the agency to warn it. And what's important, what the takeaway here is, something that has been sadly mentioned over and over on this program and elsewhere, is that some of these suspected terrorists were previously released by federal authorities at the southern border. So I've got a few things on that as well. But let's take our first break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. A beautiful view on this beautiful morning of historic Market Street as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We will be talking about Hunter Biden throughout the morning, and here's a comment from a viewer. I wasn't surprised or moved by the verdict. Biden said he wouldn't pardon him. However, I'm thinking the second the election is over, he will reduce his sentence. That could very well be the case I guess we'll have to see what the sentence is. It could be some probation. I know the media's kind of already laying down the groundwork of don't be too worked up, but this is his first conviction. So it may not be much there. Maybe a fine, maybe, probation, something like that. So yes, there's something to be said there. I'm just not sure there will be much of a sentencing. Now, Chris Wallace believes that if you recall, I brought that on the program to you yesterday, that Biden will still say, well, I'm going to pardon him anyway. Because really, and I think Miranda Devine says it in a piece that she has out today that we'll get to later on, that Biden is as good as his word, but we find out that doesn't mean much as you give up on many core beliefs for votes come November. And one of those core beliefs, we were told core beliefs, is standing strong with Israel. We see that weakening of his stance with Israel because he's terrified of this new left that is very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. For example, in the swing state of Wisconsin, Democrats pass a pro-Palestinian resolution that completely ignores the Hamas attack. And this resolution came out hours after Israel's hostage rescue. So this is a larger problem than what we're just seeing on college campuses, though we're not surprised. The resolution didn't mention the Israelis killed or taken hostage in Hamas's October 7th terror attack. The Sunday vote revealed a dark underbelly of a party that hosted a, quote, unity fair all weekend long. Convention delegates approved by 136 to 91 a resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza and calling the Jewish state's response to the massacre, quote, genocide and an erroneous violation of humanitarian law. They did not acknowledge the October 7th attack or the hostages, including Americans, I should add, that Hamas still holds. Now, delegates did approve a floor resolution condemning anti-Semitism, but because that would be too much, they struck the line noting that, quote, anti-Semitic incidents have skyrocketed nearly 400% since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attacks on Israel, according to Anti-Defamation League data. That was too much. One member of the group saying, so if Joe Biden has any common sense, he'll listen to what happened in April and to what happened today. Again, showing you the larger picture. Of course, we've had the terrifying protests that we're seeing in New York with that vitriol, that hate being spewed, where some members of the protest supporting Hamas, openly supporting Hamas, calling for the genocide of Jews. How terrifying will this be if you're a Jewish person in New York City, masked anti-Israel protesters take over a New York City subway car and tell any Zionists to raise their hands. This is your chance to get out. Now, of course, your first thought is, well, wouldn't you want to get out of that situation? Second thought is, okay, so they're just going to harass the people that are not, who are they in to harass here? But of course, the real thought goes to the terrifying fact of what that symbolizes, what they're really saying, the threat of raise your hands. Almost like a, terroristic threat. This is your chance to get out. You can hardly believe that. The sickening moment came after protesters rallied in Union Square Park in Manhattan and held up a banner that read, "Long live October 7th." So those same protesters coming in and saying, if you're a quote-unquote Zionist, raise your hand. The other protesters chanted out the same thing. No one appears to raise their hand, according to the clip. Okay, no Zionists, we're good, he said, as others cheered. Zionism, if you're confused, is defined by the Anti-Defamation League as the self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in Israel. AOC has said, I'm going to go through this quickly because I know we have a lot to talk about this morning. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has slammed anti-Semitism on the left, but notice how there's always a but. There's always a little more to add to it. Anti-Semitism, hate, and violence against Jews because of their identity is real and it's dangerous, AOC said. When the Jewish community is threatened, the progressive movement is undermined. But it's also true that accusations and false accusations of anti-Semitism are wielded against people of color and women of color by bad faith political actors. And weaponizing anti-Semitism is used to divide us. All right. Now, as the New York Post editorial board says, and I know we've talked about this on college campuses, I'm going to give you some good news in just a moment on what's happening when it comes to college enrollment. But before that, the New York Post editorial board says, believe anti-Israel protesters when they tell you they hate Jews, when they hate Jews. These anti-Zionist and anti-Israel protesters keep showing us what they really are. Jew haters, pure and simple. They literally just announced it in their vile display at the memorials for the victims of the Nova Music Festival massacre. Now, I don't have to give you the history of that. We talked about it. One anti-Zionist calmly said on camera, and this is the quote I meant to bring to you earlier, quote, "I wish Hitler was still here. He would have wiped all you out." It's the exact quote caught on video. The people who keep insisting that they're not motivated by anti-Semitism, that their actions are merely a response to Israel's alleged crimes, yet whenever they gather as a group, it somehow always is to celebrate the deaths of Jews. Isn't that interesting? Indeed, in some cases, to openly call for more of them, as the obscene banner did just the other day, and the moral criminals speaking in favor of a second Holocaust. This has been enabled by leftist politicians, like AOC, going back to her, and Jamal Bowman. By the media, which steadfastly ignored the tenor of incidents like this while endlessly running interference for Hamas. And we've talked about that with the media numerous times. Actually using Hamas propaganda numbers when reporting on deaths in Gaza. Continuing, and by the Biden administration itself, which stood idly by as hoodlums vandalized the statues and sent out Vice President Kamala Harris to moan over the IDF's astonishing rescue of hostages. As Maya Angelou once remarked, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Time to take that advice to heart with the current day's bloodthirsty anti-Zionist. But we've got, I think, good news. Now, again, I don't want to downplay it by saying that it's just on college campuses, because those examples I brought to you are not on college campuses. It's much larger than that. It's a much bigger cancer than just that. But it first kind of got attention on the college campuses. Well, maybe this speaks to that. When people are learning what's actually being taught and indoctrinated and how much money they're spending for that, the higher education industry is having a bad decade. Now, some problems are obvious, according to Glenn Reynolds, wokeness, campus unrest, losing some of their mystique, kind of getting a stigma to them. They'll tell you to follow the science right before they tell you that men can get pregnant. Violent anti-Semitic riots have done much to burnish their image, nor have the limp responses to those riots from many university administrators helped their cases. And as Glenn Reynolds said, whom the gods would destroy, they first make ridiculous. Mission accomplished. Then there's the economics of it. The reward of college was supposed to be a good job at the end. Now we hear of these majors such as, 19th century Marxist poetry. But jobs for college grads today aren't as good as they once were, while tuitions and fees have skyrocketed much faster than wage growth, meaning that many students are graduating with massive debts they likely will be unable to repay. Joe Biden is trying to use that fact to buy votes for the November election, as we mentioned, via student loan forgiveness. But whether or not that works, it's hardly a ringing endorsement of college's value. Graduates who get jobs discover workplaces of low job security and increasing foreign competition. Now, I don't want to go too far into this, but what we're learning is that the numbers are showing people are actually getting into the trades, actually going into what they're calling the hands-on work, the tool belt generation, where they're not being saddled with this debt after years of college, where they're not hundreds of thousands perhaps in debt. They're actually starting with a job that could earn you $100,000. It's a big change from what we've seen. College enrollment has fallen by 15% over the last 5 years. America's working class has been taking on the chin for decades, while press coverage often makes it sound as if workers have failed to keep up with the modern economy. The truth is, the working class's problems are largely the result of elite-driven policies on trade, immigration, and economics. Those who fell behind were told to learn to code, or otherwise given dismissive, often bad advice rather than sympathy. So pointing this out gets you tarred as a right-winger by some, but Barack Obama was suggesting that more students should consider the trades just a decade ago. He was right, and it's good that more students are following his advice, unless that is you're a college admissions officer. I thought that was a really good point. I think it does tie in with the wokeness on college campuses. Unfortunately, I think that's one of the reasons that we've talked about on the program. We've also seen a drop in young people joining the military because, again, of woke policies that we've been seeing. I've got a couple other things that are somewhat tied in, but we are going to talk about Hunter. Don't worry. But I want to just quickly mention one thing about Iran, and we'll mention a little bit about the southern border. Then we will get into Hunter Biden. I just want to give people a little time to wake up, have your cup of coffee before we really dive in to the discussion on Hunter Biden. But I'm running late, so stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. And we are back. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, a bird just flew into the camera. As we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio, a few comments from viewers. We need to send these protesters to Palestine, see how well they gel with Hamas. One-way ticket, I'll chip in. Good point. I don't think many of these protesters would get along too well once they saw Hamas face-to-face, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Next comment. I read an article that Democrats are worried President Trump could secretly pardon himself if he is elected. If this is really possible, then Hunter will be pardoned. I am no lawyer. I know that he can't pardon himself in what recently happened because it's a state issue is the way I understand it. So he couldn't at the federal level. Again, I'm no lawyer, but I've heard rumblings of other pardons from him. I'm not sure, but I do think there's a likelihood that Biden can still say at the end of the day, I'm a father and I had to pardon my son. Okay, now I've sometimes been accused of not reading comments that disagree with my opinion. It's not true. I don't get to read all of our comments sometimes because we run late or there's just too much there or maybe it's off topic. So I will admit to that. But no, we've had some very different opinions on this program from what I have and from what other viewers have. And I love that. So please write in at any time. This was one where I almost made the exception, but I'll read it. With regard to that event held annually at Coney Island, they should ban it altogether. This is in reference, if you're just joining us, Joey Chestnut is quote-unquote banned from the Nathan's hot dog eating contest on July 4th because he has a partnership with a vegan hot dog company. I know a little bit weird. I made the suggestion that the opinion, I let my opinion be known that I do enjoy the July 4th hot dog eating contest, and I like Joey Chestnut, and I like the pomp and circumstance and the over-the-topness of it all, but I'll continue with the comment. Have you seen the way the contestants devour those hot dogs? It's enough to turn your stomach. You can't disagree with that. Is that the way a normal human being would eat a hot dog? No, absolutely not. If they truly want to stage that contest annually, it should be a hot dog in a bun with sauerkraut and mustard. They may not devour the record-breaking 75 hot dogs on that time frame, but at least they would actually enjoy the experience of eating a Nathan's hot dog at Coney Island. By the way, I grew up in Brooklyn, and it was a special occasion to go to Coney Island, ride on the rides, and have a Nathan's hot dog. And that's not the way to eat and enjoy that experience. Well, thank you. And I was joking about the controversy. I totally understand. I do watch it. I'm not going to lie, and I'll probably watch it again this year. I do watch it. But there's nothing that I find in your statement that I can disagree with, except for I don't want a band. I do enjoy it. I wish Joey Chestnut would be a part of it. Okay, thank you for all the comments. We're talking everything this morning. But to the viewer's point about how these protesters would gel with Hamas, Michael Goodwin says, listen up, Joe Biden, and you too, the college anti-Semites who pledge allegiance to Hamas terrorists. And I would add not just college protesters, what we're seeing on the streets in New York too. The devil in Gaza has spoken, and the whole world must pay attention. If you did not see, Sinwar, messages from Sinwar were released where he said such things as fellow Palestinians are necessary sacrifices, the thousands that have died, necessary sacrifices. He also boasts that we have the Israelis right where we want them. Yeah, because you have Israel's biggest ally weakening. You have the media and public opinion, the college campus protests, the street protests. As he said, we have the Israelis right where we want them. And think of that, though. We've said it a million times. The media will not report on it. Palestinians, they believe, are necessary sacrifices. That's why they use them as human shields. Now you know why Israelis say Hamas is a death cult, because it is, and it should be destroyed. It should be eradicated. Sinwar is a psychopath who masterminded the October 7th Hamas invasion of Israel. The way he sees it, the more dead on both sides, the better. Everyone is cannon fodder in service to his idea of the greatest good, which is to wipe Israel off the map. And he knows those deaths play into his quote-unquote PR plan, and the media and those on the left here in the country will latch right on. He aims at nothing short of the elimination of all Israelis. Genocide is Hamas's sole purpose for being. Sinwar's words convict him as a savage whose death will make the world a better place. They show there can be no peace as long as he lives, which is why it is madness for Biden to join the calls for an immediate ceasefire. As we've mentioned numerous times on this program, and I can't remember who exactly to quote, but it was a great quote. You don't put out 80% of a fire. Israel, as a victim of a never-ending string of terror attacks that culminated on October 7th, must be allowed. Israel must be allowed to finish the job, which means finishing Sinwar and what remains of Hamas's leadership. In one sense, the journal Discovery confirms that many have long known about Hamas's leaders. Israelis, whose generosity and doctors saved Sinwar's life 2 decades ago, are all too familiar with his bloodlust. That's why there's overwhelming public support for the government's vow to eliminate him and other leaders as part of their strategy to make it impossible for terrorists to ever gain control of Gaza. But the burden of reacting to Sinwar's messages falls heaviest on the White House. Now, the journalists won't talk about that much. There's a little coverage of it. But the White House can no longer hide from the fact that his game plan has been the same for years. Attack Israel, hide Hamas terrorists and weapons in private homes, schools, and mosques, then wait for global public opinion to demand that Israel stop its counterattack before the leadership is killed. And it's working. How many calls for ceasefire have we seen? Then, after a pause, repeat the whole bloody scenario again and again. If 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 civilians are killed, Sinwar never blinks. The only thing that matters is the cause of wiping out the Jews survives. Now that the world sees his depravity, America's failed strategy in the region must give way to a smarter approach. The first thing to be scrapped is a budding Biden plan to negotiate with Hamas over the fate of 5 American citizens among the remaining hostages in Gaza. The talks conducted through Qatar officials would not include Israel It would happen only if the stalemate between Israel and the terrorists continues. Talk about stupidity. The fallback plan is an invitation for Hamas to break off talks with Israel and draw America deeper into the mess with the aim of further restraining Israel and running out the clock. This is what Sinwar meant when he said recently that we have the Israelis right where we want them. He meant bogged down in negotiations, with America threatening to withdraw support. Unfortunately, Biden is all too willing to play the fool, alarmed by his falling poll numbers, especially among young voters in swing states. He has repeatedly tightened the screws on Israel in hopes of ending the war and salvaging a second term. So I just thought that was, and we can't go through any more of it, but I thought that was a very good point. You know better, as Michael Goodwin says, Joe Biden and the left must know better than to deal with the devil known as Hamas. I don't think they do know better. For whatever reason, they believe that is a winning position. I think in November, remember, it's about domestic policy here. I know it's foreign policy. It's about domestic wins here at home. So he believes it's better to deal with Hamas, tie Israel's hands in the hopes that at the end of the day, he wins re-election and whatever happens in Israel, well, happens, I suppose. We've got to take another break. Running late. We got some more comments coming in. We are going to talk about Hunter. I promise. Stay with us. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on Frankly Speaking. I am your host, Frank Acom. I wanted to mention, I'll highlight this in the 7 o'clock hour too. By pure chance, I do not have a guest this morning. Now, we always like to have a guest during our Steuben Senior Services Fund section of the program, but this morning we had so much to cover, it just worked out. We do not have a guest, but as always, we thank Steuben Senior Services Fund for sponsoring our interview section. We've had some great interviews lately. A couple comments from viewers. Hunter Biden was given a break when he got an administrative discharge rather than a dishonorable discharge. The failure to pay taxes should be hammered full force, as they do with regular citizens. And that's why it's kind of interesting, because you're right about that 100%. I do think it's interesting, just like with this case, with the gun case, that then President Biden has to give a speech right after, talk about timing, discussing gun control measures and specifically family responsibilities for safety of guns. Next comment. Well, what, do we have a problem? Why do I have question marks? Do we have sound, right? I just received question marks. All right. Anyway, next, maybe you could explain why there are just question marks coming. Next comment. Don't get me wrong. I look forward to that event, just with different rules, as I suggested. That's the hot dog eating contest. Thank you very much. You know what I will say? It would be interesting. You always wonder how those hot dog eating champions, like how they would feel afterwards. I know they're quote unquote trained athletes, so they're used to it. They've got their bodies ready. And I actually talked to Joey Chestnut about that specifically. But when it comes to how your body would feel after eating numerous hot dogs with sauerkraut and that spicy mustard, that may not be something you can train for. All right, everybody says sounds good. Now I guess everybody knows. I don't know. Question marks. But yeah, you can explain what you mean by that. But yes, thank you for that comment. I agree. I think I wish they could enjoy the hot dogs more. That's what was so interesting with the speed eating contest, because those speedies are so difficult to eat. They still went very fast, but there seemed to be a little bit more of a enjoy it for a little bit. Well, I've got some other comments, but we'll read those when we come back. Quickly, because I don't want to run too late. I'm running late this morning. We do have to get to Hunter, and we're going to Hunter right after this one last topic. The Biden administration has released 72% of migrants who illegally crossed into San Diego, despite the crackdown, the strongest stance on the border taken yet. What did the one I commented to you that I saw on one of the news outlets? Strongest immigration policy in years. I wonder how many years, maybe 3.5? Border agents have allowed 72% of migrants who illegally crossed into the San Diego sector since the Biden administration borders crackdown to continue into the U.S. Out of more than 6,800 migrants encountered by border agents in the Southern California border sector between June 5th and Tuesday morning, more than 4,900 individuals have been released. Now, this ties in with that scary news piece I brought to you earlier on, where members that are suspected to be tied in with ISIS terrorist members were caught, and we learned that they were released into the U.S. from the southern border. Well, the New York Post editorial board has a terrifying warning, but I think it's one that we cannot take lightly. They say, with terror threats sky high and the border wide open, brace for another 9/11. The pre-9/11 warning lights are flashing once again, thanks largely to President Biden's refusal to control the southern border. That's one of the key takeaways from a new foreign affairs essay based on testimony and comments by top national security experts. Will America be caught asleep at the switch? One ominous sign, as the New York Post reports exclusively, a sting last week nabbed 6 Russian nationals with suspected ISIS ties in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and New York, at least one of whom had been released by the feds at the southern border with a court date next year. Yes, released at the border with a court date for next year. Remember the Boston Marathon bombing, a source told the Post. I'm afraid something like that might happen again or worse. And they go through how many times we've heard these warnings from the top up. But obviously the terrorist threat alone is grounds to secure the border. But President Biden refuses. Sure, U.S. counterterror agents do their best. As with the ring they just rolled up. But as 9/11 proved, terrorists only need to get lucky once. And we talked about those migrants that went on the Marine base. Many believe was a trial run for a terrorist attack. So this ties in more with what the New York Post editorial board is saying, that the terrorists only need to get lucky once. It's vital to minimize the risk by attacking them overseas and diminishing their numbers, resources, and capabilities. Yeah, one of the easiest and most critical steps is to secure the border, but this president won't. If you want to avoid another 9/11, send him into retirement. That's the New York Post editorial board. I'd love to hear what you have to say on that issue. But now, when we come back, Hunter Biden. Let's talk about it. We've had a lot of great comments already. Keep them coming in, and we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking. So many comments coming in this morning. I can't thank you enough. First off, sad now and hard to watch is Biden and his health. I see my sister's condition in Joe, and memory will soon be, who are you? He better pardon his son now before he cannot remember who his own son is. Biden is done this year, and I'm sad I see mental health decay, and it is sad. Medication will soon be no help. There's a piece to that. I can't remember where it was from, and maybe we'll get to it later on, but showing that video from the Juneteenth celebration and how uncomfortable that is, I understand your point. It's not, I don't think people on the right are saying it out of any type of joy or any type of political issue, other than the fact that it's terrifying that this man is in charge of the free world. And that's really what the conversation has been about. So no one wants to see this. We've said that from the beginning. No one wants to see it, but it's there. And for the media to not report on it is doing a disservice to the country. But thank you for that. The next, and we've been talking about the hot dog eating challenge on July 4th because of Joey Chestnut being banned because he is sponsored by a vegan hot dog, which all of this, because there's so much pomp and circumstance with the hot dog eating contest and so much over the top, very wrestling like, I wonder if this is all to hype up the event too. Not to be conspiratorial, but it almost seems like something that he comes back at the last minute and wins, or whatever the case may be. But the challenge is part of it with hot dog contests. I believe it. The numbers and how many you can get. I also mentioned that, to our one viewer's point, it should be eaten like you would eat a hot dog at Coney Island. And I had suggested that the sauerkraut mustard might get a little much. But I have competed, this viewer says, in hot wing contests. My best was 12 in 3 minutes, 33 seconds. My goodness. Wow. Good for that. Congratulations. That sounds very impressive to me. I brought up this story joking, but now I'm kind of fascinated about everybody's thoughts on the hot dog eating contest. Do you do that thing with the wings, if I can ask if you're still watching, where you like squish it off the bone that I see? I don't know. I saw that on some video one time. Like there's a way to crack it so that all the meat comes right off. Anyway, we'll move on. Sorry. I know people are getting ready for breakfast. So Hunter Biden broke his silence after the felony conviction. He released a statement I am more grateful today for the love and support I experienced this last week from Melissa, my family, my friends, and my community than I am disappointed by the outcome. Recovery is possible by the grace of God, and I am blessed to experience that gift one day at a time. Now, defense attorney Abe Lowell says that they are naturally disappointed by the guilty verdict. They're looking into appeals, and that's what Biden said. You know, Biden gave President Biden gave the statement that he respects the rule of law and the justice system prevailed or something like that. But they'll wait until, well, I don't think he said that last part, but he said they'll wait and see what happens on appeals. One juror said that the big issue for them, I got to take another break already, was calling his daughter to the stand. Naomi Biden, who's 30, was one of the witnesses called by the defense. She recounted her father's erratic behavior in the days after he illegally lied about his crack cocaine addiction, the purchase of .38 caliber revolver on October 12, 2018. You know that point. At one point, she said Hunter had texted her at 2 a.m. asking if Naomi would meet him somewhere in Manhattan to exchange cars after she used his Ford Raptor pickup to help move her then-boyfriend, Peter Neal, into her apartment. I'm really sad, Dad, she texted. I don't have to go through all this. You've heard this. You know this part. But according to some of the jurors, who are doing a lot of interviews, by the way, I felt sorry for Naomi. I really did. I don't think any daughter should have to be put up there to testify on their father's behalf. That was heart-wrenching, and I think all the jurors felt the same way. So that was one of the many issues. The jurors are giving interviews across many media outlets, so thank you for the waves coming in this morning. There are a few opinion pieces on this that I think are going to be worth mentioning on both sides. I had mentioned earlier, and I'd love to hear your thought on this. Stephen Collinson says that with this verdict, Hunter Biden's conviction shatters Trump's persecution narrative. Do you agree with that? We knew that, and I believe we brought this up on the show not that long ago, that if he was found guilty, that would be the case. That the case would be, see, Trump, the system works. No one is above the law. This shatters your rigged theory. This shatters your persecution theory. So we're going to talk about that. We do have a couple other, Andrew Cuomo testifying behind closed doors about COVID. We may get to that. I do have a couple New York State issues in general. So the whole program, or the whole hour, next hour, and part of this hour won't just be about Hunter, but I would love to hear your opinion on it. And I've got to say, we've had great discussions already, and I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate that. So let's take a short break, last break of this hour, then we'll be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Hour number one nearly in the books. It's hard to believe how fast this show's going, and we've covered so much. Some of the information you won't get elsewhere, and I appreciate you joining us. We are talking about Hunter. Now, how awkward, and I think it's from all sides on this, left, the right, the media, who was on the left, but I'm just saying that this was very awkward that President Biden, first public appearance was at a gun control convention, for lack of a better term, where he discussed holding families accountable. Now, he's got a lot of people around him writing speeches. I mean, this is at all levels of politics to an extent, not all levels, but federal level. They couldn't have rewritten that one line really quickly, or maybe said, it is the president, he's very busy, maybe we could reschedule. President Biden demanded punishment for families who leave guns unlocked on Tuesday. In his first public remarks since his son Hunter was convicted of 3 felonies for illegally owning a gun that another Biden family member tossed into a public dumpster. So make sure you keep your guns safe. Quote, it's time we establish universal background checks. And by the way, and require the safe storage of firearms. The 81-year-old said at a pro-gun control conference. We should hold families responsible if they don't provide those locks on those guns. Now, Biden didn't directly address the guilty verdict. And this was a pre-scheduled speech to the group. You are familiar with this. Everytown for Gun Safety, a nonprofit founded by New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And remember, they used to call this organization a grassroots organization. Bloomberg, one of the richest men in the world, funding it. Anyway, You know what happened in the trial. Just the most awkward place to have your first public appearance. What's the chances? Biden made a number of other head-turning remarks at this conference. At one point, he referred to Vice President Kamala Harris, who controversially presided over about 1,900 marijuana convictions as San Francisco District Attorney from 2004 to 2011. It's one of the things that did not make her very popular when she ran for president with young people, because they started to call her out for her tough on pot stance. Well, I guess not, I wouldn't say not reading the room, just not maybe realizing. Biden said she was a pretty fierce prosecutor. Yes, throwing a lot of young people in jail. And as the media said at the time, and those who didn't like Harris, a lot of young black males were thrown in because of her convictions. So it's not something they normally point to. It's not something that they highlight on her resume. Continuing, Biden also misstated the acronym of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives as the AFT, and then incorrectly stated historical restrictions on cannon ownership. So kind of a typical speech where they will need to go back and make some changes. We've got a lot of comments coming in. Thank you so much for all of the back and forth so far this morning. Was Hunter's wife charged with throwing gun in the dumpster? No, I think she got some type of immunity there was something to that where if she testified. I don't quote me on that, but there was some reason why charges weren't brought up. And I want to say it was, she was given something, but I can't remember exactly what it was. We're going to talk more about, because really she should. Again, this goes back into what we're saying. If we have a tough on guns, a gun control advocate in the White House, it's tough to watch this and not think of hypocrisy. And right, to your point, that is not safe storage. Yeah, throwing it in that dumpster, absolutely. Another issue where you or I would be in a lot of serious trouble. When we come back in the next hour, Julian Zelzer says quickly, I'm not going to read too much more into this, but the same opinion as what the New York Post has, which is that was an awkward place to have your first public appearance after your son was found guilty on 3 felony charges. But we have to take a break. Hour number 2 in mere moments. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking live on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. We have a lot of viewer comments. If you're just joining us, you've missed a lot. We've just started getting to the nitty-gritty of talking about Hunter Biden, so you've come at the right time, but you missed so much. We talked hot dog eating contests. We talked about immigration policy, protests. But we have some comments from viewers. How come you ran the ending credits at the end of your first hour? That's a great question. I don't have an answer. That's called a complete error and pushing the wrong button. That's what happened. But thank you. Next question. Law-abiding gun owners always suffer, not question, I guess, but law-abiding gun owners always suffer the consequences of others' stupidity and failure. Why? There's a question. You're right. I mean, it's the law-abiding citizens that have to jump through all the hoops because that's who they are. They're law-abiding citizens to get guns. And yet it's people like this. Now, Hunter was found guilty. We don't know what kind of sentencing he'll have. But yeah, so you've got his ex-lover throwing that gun in the dumpster. It does always seem like the ones that pay the biggest price are the ones that are following the laws. So I think that's a very fair point. Next comment from a different viewer. So now the Republicans have a convicted felon in their midst, and the Democrats have a convicted felon. What will the debates look like, if they will happen at all? And then, what about Election Day? I'm glad we all have a front row seat to the circus. A lot of good points there. I don't know. The debate thing intrigues me because we're getting close, just a few weeks, and we'll have the presidential debate, the earliest in presidential history. So I'm not sure what it looks like. It does take, kind of to your question here, there is, and it wasn't from a conservative outlet, I don't believe. It came from, there it is, Bloomberg. Biden's plan to brand Trump a felon is hit by his son's conviction. Yes, I think the media will still run with it very easily. Convicted felon, Donald Trump. Convicted felon. They'll say it nonstop. I think Biden can still touch on it in the debate if the debate happens. I'm sorry. I'm just not all that convinced it's still going to happen. I know it's soon, but there's so much at stake for Biden. But then again, as I've said a million times, Republicans, and specifically Donald Trump, have set the bar so low for Biden that I think you don't have to do much to have. And I've already written the headline for you. When needed most, Biden came through. Needing the debate performance of his life, Biden shows he can still do it. That kind of thing. But what this piece from... Oh, by the way, I just wanted to mention quickly, because we have so much to talk about today, it worked out really in our favor. There is not a Steuben Senior Services Fund interview this morning. It's just you and I. So you are, in a sense, a person being interviewed. So please have those comments coming in. I'm seeing so many right here. I'm getting distracted. I sometimes want to read them live, but it's tough. I'll read them after the break. So how the conviction impacts the president's campaign against Trump, whom he has cast as a threat to the rule of law, as well as the effect in voters' perception, and of course remains unclear. What is certain is Hunter Biden and Trump's cases are poised to run on parallel tracks during the campaign as they face sentencing and potential appeals. Another twist to an already close race. Todd Belt, a director of the political management program at George Washington University, acknowledged the difficult situation facing the president. He did promise to return us to normalcy. It's not normal for presidents to comment on trials like this in such a way. He really wants to avoid the perception of partiality. The political challenge posed by the conviction was more immediately apparent. The verdict came in just hours before the president was poised to deliver remarks on his administration's steps to ratchet up scrutiny on gun purchases, Yeah, that's another point. That's a really good point. It wasn't just about families having responsibilities to keep guns safe. It was also about upping scrutiny of gun purchases, interestingly enough. And by the way, every once in a while you see this mentioned in the article. I'm surprised it doesn't in this Bloomberg piece. But so many in the media just don't bring up the fact that Hunter had a sweetheart plea deal just sitting there until his lawyers, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit, but his lawyers got cocky and blew it for him. All of this was completely unnecessary, an unforced error. Julian Zelzer says it doesn't get more awkward than it did for Biden. The president spoke at Everytown for Gun Safety Action Fund's Gun Sense University, where he blasted Trump's record on gun control. After a school shooting in Iowa that killed a student and a teacher, my predecessor was asked about it. Do you remember what he said? He said, you have to get over it. No, we don't have to get over it. We have to stop it, and stop it now. My predecessor told the NRA convention recently he's proud of that quote. I did nothing on guns when I was president. And by doing nothing, he made the situation considerably worse. Talking about awkward timing, sometimes real-world politics works in mysterious ways. But the fact that Hunter Biden's story is now intertwined with a push for gun control creates some unusual cross-pressures, not only for Biden, but also for both Democrats and Republicans as they navigate the difficult terrain of the 2024 election. For Republicans, there's a danger of saying too much. After all, the GOP has moved over the years into a staunch position against almost any stringent gun regulation. Boy, the media does a great job, don't they, folks? So did you know, if you're a Republican watching this, you are against any kind of gun regulation whatsoever? Should they double down on the actual charges that have resulted in Biden's conviction, they would end up helping to bolster the very kinds of gun restriction laws and that the party has been eager to avoid. Haven't Republicans always said before you put new laws on the books, enforce the laws that are already there? And isn't this a prime example? So no, it doesn't make you look hypocritical, and which is what Julian Zelzer is insinuating here. Quite the opposite. We've been pretty strong on that stance, enforce the laws on the books. So to suggest that this is going to show some type of hypocrisy. For Democrats, or incentives to avoid attacking the legitimacy of the gun charges against Hunter Biden. As President Biden made clear in his speech, many Democrats have worked hard to elevate the issue of gun control following after many years of mass shootings that have shocked the nation. Again, remember, this is coming from CNN. With his speech, President Biden had an opportunity to show voters as the election heats up that he and his party are serious about continuing to pursue gun control despite the fierce opposition Republicans have put up on each time the issue reaches Capitol Hill. I don't. Enough on this. It's typical of what we're going to see from the media. President Biden has made clear that, unlike Trump, he will respect the decisions of the courts and not use his power to pardon Hunter Biden, even if the outcome is devastating for his son. This plays exactly into what one viewer said earlier on. This is how they are going to use it. This is how they're going to spin it. He believes in the rule of law, unlike Trump. You cannot compare these two trials, as we've said time and time again on this program. You cannot compare these two as being equal. And as I mentioned earlier in this program, if you or I did what Hunter Biden did, we would be charged. We would have some type of record, whatever that case may be. If we did what Trump did, there would not have been a charge, because as even Julian Zelzer from CNN said, this is only being brought up because it's Trump. But I'll continue. This gives room for Democrats to avoid saying too much about Tuesday's news, keeping the focus on Trump and avoiding any questions about the laws that are at the heart of this case. So I don't know. We got a lot of people walking by and waving this morning. The way the media can spin this, as I mentioned, all morning long, and I want to hear your opinion. The Hunter Biden conviction shatters Trump's persecution narrative. That's Stephen Collinson. So what we are to ignore here, just if you want to play catch up so you can agree with Stephen Collinson, you must ignore the sweetheart plea deal. You must ignore the differences in the case. As I just mentioned, one we would be charged with, you or I. The other, Trump's, we would not have been, because it was only about getting Trump. So if you're willing to ignore those, you can buy into Stephen Collinson's position. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about that position when we come back. Also, a lot more on both sides of what the thoughts are on Hunter Biden. I would love to hear your thoughts. It is starting to look a little bit like a circus, as the one viewer said. So please keep your comments coming in. And we will be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. We're going to play the right one this time. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. Our beautiful view of Marcus Street here in Corning as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Washington is the circus. Current administration is full of clowns, kind of like Albany. I would agree. Thank you, viewer. Keep those comments coming in. A lot of waves. I appreciate it. I was just getting back on track here. So as I mentioned, Stephen Collinson said that the Hunter Biden conviction has shattered Trump's persecution narrative. The survival of the rule of law in America and untainted justice may depend on the choice voters make in November. Really? Stephen Collinson, in full disclosure, does not even try to hide it. I don't know why I said full disclosure. He does not try to hide his bias. So right now, just like we've heard in the past, the threat to justice, never mind the party that is leaking audio, secretly recorded audio of the Supreme Court, calling for the stacking of the Supreme Court, ignoring the Supreme Court with the student loan debt forgiveness. Never mind any of that. Never mind the questions that are raised by the Trump trial in the first place and the politicalization of it. Never mind that. Untainted justice and the rule of law is on trial, essentially. And it's up to you, the voter, in November. The country's divergent possible paths under President Joe Biden or presumptive GOP nominee Donald Trump were highlighted in the way both men, their families, and their political operations reacted to the twin trials and verdicts. Again, you must forget about the sweetheart plea deal if you're to accept this. That was blown up by Hunter's lawyers. You must also ignore the complete differences in the biases in relations to each trial. Biden made no effort to interfere in the prosecution of his son with either his executive authority or with the media megaphone of his office. He allowed his own Justice Department to secure a guilty verdict Tuesday that could result in jail for the recovering addict and hurt his own 2024 campaign. He has already said he won't pardon his son. In his first reaction to the verdict, Hunter Biden didn't attack the judge or prosecutors, simply saying he was grateful for the love and support of his family and blessed to be clean again. The Biden's contrast with Trump's reactions to his own trial and conviction nearly 2 weeks ago in the hush money trial. We don't have to go through all this. You get it. Trump said it was rigged, as Trump is the actual political opponent of Biden, having how many charges against him? I'm not even just talking about the 34 felony charges. I'm talking where they can now say convicted felon. I'm talking about the other trials looming. And they always take out of context what he said about revenge. And by the way, that's one thing I want to mention, because I caught this the other day. I started to see the trend. And we talk about the trend a lot here on this program, like when all of a sudden one politician says chaos and then all the media is saying something's chaos. The new trend is for you to be concerned that you're going to be thrown in jail if Trump wins the presidency. Rachel Maddow said it yesterday. We've had numerous reporters, people that disagree with Trump saying, I really fear that I could be thrown in jail. Revenge, retribution. And that he may throw me in jail. Even though he said specifically and that's not even reference to those people. It was in reference to more important people, that he would not seek that revenge because it's not good for the country. Yes, he did say revenge can be justified at times, but it is not good for the country. It's tearing the country apart. Even though he did say I would have every right to go after them. But Trump claims discredited by Hunter Biden verdict. Had Biden been acquitted, Republicans would surely have argued that a biased jury in a state where everyone seems to know the first family had proven their point. But the guilty verdict blew another of their political arguments out of the water. Now, one juror even said that politics never came up in the deliberation. Joe Biden came to office pledging to restore the independence of the Justice Department following Trump's repeated efforts to employ its legal and investigative powers almost as a personal law firm during his term. Wow. I know. Why am I going through all this bias? We know CNN has this bias. We know that Stephen Collinson has this bias. But wouldn't it be nice to just see the facts reported on? The Hunter Biden verdict also contradicted the central rationale of Trump's multiple legal defenses in his 4 criminal cases, several civil matters, and his entire presidential campaign. This is the false notion that he is a victim of a weaponized legal system by a Justice Department that exclusively targets Republicans. Did he say exclusively targets? I remember someone coming up to me, and I know it's anecdotal, but they were, I think what you would say, a Democrat. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to label how far one way or the other they were, but Democrat. And it was when Bob, as they're calling him, Goldbar Menendez, got those charges of bribery. And they said, see, I thought it was just Republicans that were going to jail. There was just Republicans being attacked by the judiciary. That was never said. It wasn't as if every single person on trial was only a Republican. It's nonsense. See, they put words in people's mouths, or not even put words, they misconstrue any kind of argument that was being made in their hopes to prove a political point. And that's all this is. This is a political piece that, let's face it, the Biden campaign could have put out themselves. So much for the weaponization of the Justice Department to go after just the enemies of the other side. An interesting way of putting that, just the enemies of the other side. But this is a testament to the fact that Justice Department under Merrick Garland is trying its very best to steer straight down the middle, as it should, and bring people to trial that it thinks are worthy of prosecution. The notion of the Justice Department neutrality was bolstered by post-trial comments from David Wise. Wise thanked the Attorney General for allowing him to act independently, and he added, in a coda to 2 fraught weeks that have dragged the justice system into toxic political waters, that no one in this country is above the law. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant. Hunter Biden should be no more accountable than any other citizen convicted of the same conduct. So then, of course, then he says, well, the truth, and of course what Stephen Collinson is saying, it has to be the truth. You have to accept him at his word. You can't, again, you just have to ignore the sweetheart plea deal, all that. Then he says, well, it's probably, even this truth that I'm telling you is unlikely to change the GOP Biden narrative. Boy, you can write this stuff for him, can't you? It does not come as a surprise that is the position that CNN would take, because this is what we had predicted on the program quite some time ago, which was that if there was a guilty verdict, which I know many of us were caught by surprise that there was a guilty verdict, but if there was a guilty verdict, that they would say, see, everything is even. They've already been trying to say with just a trial alone. That's why this just plays into their narrative. But they originally said just the fact that there was a trial shows that the justice system is perfect, that Biden or that Trump isn't being persecuted. The way that they twist it and spin it. We're going to tell you a little bit more about that when we come back. Oh, here's a good comment from a viewer. A lot of waves coming in too. Thank you. What happened to the investigation of the coke found in the White House? Oh, it's done. I mean, they admitted that right away, remember? But I understand what you're insinuating there. But yeah, that was gone. The investigation, lasted a couple days, if that? They said they didn't have the evidence. Normandy Biden's speech copied Reagan's speech years ago. He is not Reagan. Yeah, they tried to equate Biden, didn't they? Not equate, maybe. They tried to compare him to Reagan, which, keep in mind, the same people trying to compare him to Reagan and saying, that's the speech that we need. We need the Reagan speech. We need Biden's speech because right now we have a threat to democracy and a fascist in Donald Trump. So we need that Reagan speech, and Reagan fought against fascism. Remember, the same people saying that and the outlets that they are employed by could not stand Ronald Reagan. Try to destroy Reagan, much in the way, though not as forcefully, but much in the way they have with Donald Trump. So we got some other comments coming in. I don't want to run too late. As I mentioned, special edition of Frankly Speaking, no Steuben Senior Services Fund interview. And we thank Steuben Senior Services Fund for being a part of the program. But we had no interview because we wanted to spend time, just you and I, going over the Hunter story and so many other. I mean, Cuomo testifying behind closed doors, which he should feel at home testifying behind closed doors because that's where they used to do the budgets, was behind closed doors. So you should feel pretty good about that. Right at home. Feel right at home. So maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that. We're not going to spend the whole time on Hunter, but there's a couple of pieces, one by Jonathan Turley, that I'd love to hear your opinion on. I'd love to hear your opinion on all of this. I think we've had a really good mixed bag of thoughts about everything this morning, and the heartbreaking news that Joey Chestnut will not be participating in the July 4th hot dog eating contest. Maybe perhaps the biggest story of the program today. I kind of think it's hype now. I'm kind of convinced myself that this is hype. Just get more attention. He'll come in at the last minute, just like in wrestling. But let's take that break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Hakem. Look at all those waves we received this morning. All the comments. We've got a few more comments. And I'm going to give you a piece of good news. Then we'll get back into Hunter. First off, Cuomo should be charged with negligence in the thousands of deaths he caused with the nursing home decision. That's what Republicans yesterday were trying to get to the bottom of in Washington. Behind closed doors, he was where the hearing was actually held. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. Janice Dean, who spoke out a lot about this after losing her in-laws, she has a piece this morning at the New York Post, I believe, talking about what Cuomo had to say. Hopefully we'll be able to get to it. Another comment from a viewer. Frank, I was amazed that Hunter was convicted on all 3 felonies. Then I started thinking, it makes sense that he would be convicted. This way, they can reinforce the idea that no one is above the law in this administration. Hold off sentencing until after the election, then pass down a very lenient sentence. If this judge doesn't play ball and does sentence jail time, after the election, Biden will go back on his word and pardon him. Thank you. We had another very similar to that this morning. Thank you, Ken. Appreciate that. All right, here's some really great news, just to get a breather in here before we get back into the negative. And that is Military and Veterans Appreciation Day at the Glen. Assemblyman Phil Palmisano brought this to our attention. It's Sunday, June 23rd, 8 a.m. till 3 p.m. Lot 5 parking area, Watkins Glen International Raceway. If you can see the number there on the bottom of your screen for more information, 607-535-3423. This is what the Assemblyman had to say about it. Thank you to WGI for once again offering this wonderful gesture, an opportunity to our veterans. Your generous, continued, and unwavering support for our veterans over the years has been amazing. It's been a privilege for me to help promote this special event every year. Our active duty military and veterans have done and continue to do so much to keep us safe and protect our freedoms. This is a nice way for us to say thank you to our nation's heroes. The bottom line is there are no words we can say or actions we can take that will do justice to the incredible debt we owe all of our veterans. Thank you again to WGI, and thank you to all of our military and veterans. I thought that was a nice move and a nice event. So again, there it is, June 23rd. Mark your calendars. I know we have a big veteran population here that watches, frankly speaking. All right, back to Hunter Biden. Jonathan Turley, who we quote a lot. He's on Fox News. He does some stuff for New York Post. He's for a lot of outlets. And I think his official job is a law professor. But he says the conviction of Hunter Biden on all the federal gun counts created a surprising new precedent in Delaware for Hunter Biden. In terms of the law, this was the easiest judgment since the Jussie Smollett verdict. Actually, the Biden jury took a third of the time with a verdict in just 3 hours. For Hunter Biden, though, this was the first time he's ever been held accountable for any criminal conduct, be it drug use, prostitution, tax evasion, violation of various federal laws. That's a very good point. This is why I like what Jonathan Turley had to say, and this is why I would love your opinion on it. You know, we've heard through his audiobook some of the things he was involved in the past. We've seen the videos from the laptop. We have questions about some of his business dealings, with his father. So this is, when you do the research, when you think about it, it is the first time he's held accountable. To have that moment come in his hometown, the hometown of the Bidens, likely only magnified the shock. Last year, Jonathan Turley described the growing legal problems of Hunter Biden as the cost of legal gluttony. The Bidens have always been adept at avoiding accountability, particularly for the extensive influence peddling operation that raked in millions in foreign payments. And that legal gluttony, to Jonathan Turley's point, is why I'm sure they did not originally take the sweetheart plea deal that was on the table. Because the confidence, the arrogance, whatever word you want to use, that comes with the Biden name in Delaware, they thought that they should have full immunity from everything, pretty much from now until the end of time. But that appetite for special treatment proved the undoing of Hunter, much like his appetite in other areas of his life. Hunter and his team expected the same level of immunity when he worked with special counsel David Wise to cut an astonishing deal to avoid any real punishment for these or other crimes. Even before the deal was cut, Wise allowed major crimes to expire under the statute of limitations. Remember that? Despite having an agreement to extend that period. Well, I didn't think statute of limitations really had that much to do with anything anymore. I mean, I guess that's what I learned from the Trump trial, that you can resurrect quote-unquote crimes after the statute of limitations. So again, to Stephen Collinson's point about that's the end of any talks of Trump's persecution, think of the difference. Again, think of the difference, the plea deal, statute of limitations deal. He also agreed to a deal that would have avoided any jail time and would have given Hunter an immunity bath that would have drowned the entire criminal code. This again, Jonathan Turley. Hunter and his legal team succeeded in securing the sweetheart deal, which shocked many of us. Yeah, so even the fact that that was ever on the table. More importantly, it shocked U.S. District Judge Norica, who only had to question the immunity provision to have the entire agreement fall apart in open court. The prosecutor admitted that he had never seen a plea bargain like this in his long career. Keep that in mind, again, when you have Stephen Collinson lecturing you saying that this means that the justice system works and that there is no persecution against Trump, I should say. That no one had seen a plea deal like that, so you have to ignore that bit of information to agree with Stephen Collinson. That's when the legal gluttony became even more pronounced. Rather than fight to preserve key elements of the plea agreement, defense counsel said, just rip it up. Later, the special counsel said the Hunter defense team would not agree to a compromise agreement and instead forced the matter to trial. As Jonathan Turley wrote before the trial, that the defense was insane to try the case rather than plead guilty. A plea would have virtually guaranteed that there would be no jail time in this case. Instead, the defense launched an open jury nullification effort to get the jury to simply ignore the evidence. In the hometown of the Bidens, this was the best jury pool the Hunter could hope for. However, the nullification strategy was another manifestation of this appetite. Hunter Biden was still demanding a pass in a case where guilty was unavoidably and undeniably obvious to everyone. Defense counsel Lowell made a series of defense that collapsed within the first 2 days in spectacular fashion. Lowell suggested that someone else checked the box on the form and that Hunter may have had a brief window of sobriety or non-drug use. It was a weak argument, but Hunter's own words played against him with the audiobook. We know all about that. And a store employee recounted watching Hunter fill out the form. In the first interview with a juror, Fox News seemed to confirm that the Biden defense overplayed its hand. The juror raised the text messages showing Hunter trying to score drugs at a 7-Eleven. Lowell suggested that he might have been at a store buying a donut. However, the juror noted that Hunter stated in his book that the 7-Eleven was his favorite spot for buying drugs. It is an example of how an all-you-can-eat defense can fail to even get a donut from a sympathetic jury. The problem now is this all played out in front of the judge who will now sentence Hunter. Norika witnessed the attempt to secure the sweetheart deal and then the disaster in open court. She watched as a defendant not only refused to admit guilt, but decided to put an obvious jury nullification defense. That history could weigh in favor of a short jail stint for Hunter, a risk that would have been effectively eliminated by a guilty plea. So that was Jonathan Turley with a good law mind on exactly what happened. And I'm glad that he and others are bringing up the fact that the plea deal is such an important component to this, that the plea deal is what shows you of what Trump and many are saying in Washington, that's what shows you the apples to oranges comparison, that the one has a bias and the other not. The New York Post editorial board says that even with this guilty verdict, it won't end Hunter's entitled arrogance. And that seems to be kind of a common thread. What people, because we saw that arrogance on full display after the plea deal, rip it up in those type of scenarios in the trial. So, and a life, like Jonathan Turley said, never really being held to account his whole life. Never any kind of accountability. So you don't imagine that arrogance to go away very quickly. Keep those comments coming in. We have to take a short break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street. The New York Post editorial board believes that this won't end Hunter Biden's entitled arrogance, and they highlight the fact, too, that you had the sweetheart plea deal, the fact that he even insisted on going to trial in what was beyond an open and shut case. Maybe he thought that he might be able to get off, that the sympathetic jury, the pro-Biden jury, but it won't end. What they said here is this is arrogance. One sentence and federal sentencing guidelines suggest a good chance he won't get prison time. He'll likely appeal. And listen to this. Appeal, excuse me. Did I say appear? He'll likely appeal, probably by arguing that this law, passed with help from then Senator Joe Biden, violates the Second Amendment. I think that would be an interesting take on it. Look at the waves coming in. Miranda Devine says that Biden couldn't save Hunter this time around. I guess Hunter assumed his father's power would protect him, as it has his whole life. But he could have avoided the jury's verdict and the collateral damage to his father's presidential campaign if only he had accepted for once some minimal responsibility for his wrongdoing, just once in his life. If he had not instructed his lawyers to demand blanket immunity and threaten prosecutors with career suicide. Yes, and that's a really good point by Miranda Devine. Hunter still has not admitted ownership of the laptop that formed the backbone of this case. So keep that in mind. When he's never been held accountable, when he's always had these shady dealings and got away with it, why did he think this would be any different, is her point. Do you agree with that? There would have been no guilty verdict, no gun trial, no indictment on tax fraud, and not even last year's ill-fated sweetheart plea deal if two IRS whistleblowers had not risked their livelihoods to do the right thing. And I mentioned that part of Miranda Devine's piece because she always makes sure to, I guess, praise, for lack of a better word, those whistleblowers who put so much on the line for what is actual justice. Now, continuing, she says the president will likely spin Hunter's gun conviction as a testament to his own integrity and humble acceptance of the jury verdict, in contrast to Donald Trump's complaint that he is the victim of a two-tier justice system. But nobody buys Joe's claims that he will not use his power to pardon his son. If his presidency has taught us anything, it is that his word as a Biden is worthless. That is Miranda Devine. She has a new book out called The Big Guy, which is coming out in September. All right, how we doing? How we doing on time? We're doing good. But back to how we're trying to give you both sides of the coverage this morning. The Independent out of the United Kingdom saying a tale of two families. Trump's hide and Biden's unite in the face of criminal trials. I find outlets, and just the way that they even put the headline to show really their true colors, or what you can expect when you're reading them, when you're going to these outlets, just like Stephen Collinson's piece that we mentioned earlier, that this guilty verdict ensures that Trump can no longer claim persecution. Do you agree with that? And any other topics you want to discuss? We've got a few other things. Oh, to a viewer's point earlier, talking about what we're seeing with, and it was very difficult to watch, the Juneteenth celebration where Biden was freezing up and slurring his words, where we're watching that mental decline that the media is trying their best to ignore. The Post has a piece on this as well, a lot of Post articles this morning. And they go through, the Juneteenth celebration where he froze up, where he had that speech where there's a very long slur. I'm not going to try to read it. It would be tough to say, but gibberish essentially. And then you had the awkwardness that we brought to you last week at the D-Day ceremony, the not knowing when to sit, the confusion on his face. But like they said, all of that just kind of paints a picture of a grandpa in a rocking chair on a sunny front porch saying back in my day. But the man not so slowly going senile in public is the president of the United States. The head of the world's richest and most powerful state, commander-in-chief of its military, and he's losing it as Americans face terrible problems at home and abroad, most caused and or exasperated by Biden's terrible policies. The public can see what's right in front of them. This, again, the New York Post editorial board. That's why poll after poll shows voters, including Democrats, deeply concerned about Biden's mental and physical fitness for the very difficult job he's asking to be entrusted with again as he advances more deeply into his twilight years. Is he even going to make it to Election Day? How do you feel about President Harris? There's no way of denying it any longer. Biden's past it. And another term with him in charge, and in charge is in quotes, would be even more disastrous than the first. Well, yeah, and I think the point is, and many people have said this on the show before, many believe that he's not in charge. That it is actually the people behind the scenes that are controlling the show. And I know we've said that numerous times on this program. Quick comment before we go to break. Do you think we will have riots and destructions if Trump wins, claiming the voting was rigged? Are all the illegal immigrants going to come out of the woodwork in protest? I don't know about that last part. I believe there'll be riots and destruction. I mean, how can you see what's happening on college campuses over Biden's policy on Israel, weakening policy on Israel? I think, we saw the protests the day after Trump was inaugurated back in 2016. But since that time, the left has grown more violent and destructive in their protests. So, yeah, I do see that happening. Unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong, but I do see that happening if and when former President Donald Trump wins. All right, let's take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson's studio. A couple of things that we're going to move along from. By the way, as I mentioned, I wanted to quote it exactly because this is going to be the new talking point in the media. Rachel Maddow is concerned that Trump will put her in a camp. Yes, I'm worried, she said. I'm worried about the country broadly if we put someone in power who is openly avowing He plans to build camps to hold millions of people and to root out what he's described in subhuman terms as his enemy from within. Again, history is helpful here. He's not joking when he says this stuff, and we've seen that happen when people take power proclaiming that kind of agenda. So Rachel Maddow is concerned, and we've seen others say that, so I think that's going to be a somewhat common talking point from those in the media. Comment from a viewer. In the Biden administration, the DOJ believes the following. The statute of limitations resurrections play is only allowed when charging conservatives. Yeah, the idea of bringing the resurrection of the statute of limitations is only allowed when charging conservatives. The sweetheart plea deal is the special play enjoyed by liberals. Hopefully we can get Trump elected and clean up the corrupt DOJ. Thank you, Ken. Elise Stefanik, who is on the short list, we're being told, for vice president. She has been elected the chair of the New York GOP delegation to the Republican National Convention. Giving the hardworking families of upstate New York and the North Country a voice at the highest levels of government is the greatest privilege of my professional career. I am grateful to my fellow New York GOP delegates for electing me chair of the New York GOP delegation to proudly cast our votes for President Trump. So that's Elise Stefanik. Paul Ryan, and we're covering everything here, folks. This is what happens right at the end. You know it. Even though we're getting waves right up until the end. We've got so much to cover. Remember Paul Ryan was the VP nominee under Mitt Romney? It's always interesting to hear Paul Ryan tell us what he believes is the Republicans' ticket to win, or how they need to win. Now, if you recall, Paul Ryan did not even carry his home state for the Romney-Ryan presidential ticket. He believes that Trump is unfit for office. That's what he said on Fox, Your World with Neil Cavuto. Now, I know a lot of people, says Cavuto, who also shared your same concerns about Donald Trump, that sort of said, all right, we're rallying around Donald Trump. You said that that would not be the case with you. You had said that he's a populist and an authoritarian narcissist. That character is too important to me, that it's a job that requires a kind of character he just doesn't have. That's pretty strong. See how Neil Cavuto might get a little bit of his own. Anyway, Ryan said, yeah, that's the way I feel. I agree with that. I don't support Biden either. I think his policies are terrible. I hate the fact that I feel I got to write in a Republican like I did the last time in 2020. I think that's a fine example of someone believing that they're the smartest person in the room. Being that sometimes when people come to you and say, I'm always an independent, or especially when you have someone come up and say, I'm a registered Republican, you know they've only ever voted Democrats their whole life, but they probably did the Republican thing for some class or for some political reason. So he believes he is the smartest person in the room, that he essentially wasted his vote. Why even go in and write in that? As a protest vote, I suppose? I voted for him in 2016, hoping that there was going to be a different kind of person in office. And I do think character is a really important issue. If you put yourself above the Constitution, as he has done, I think that makes you unfit for office. Again, this is Paul Ryan, did not carry his home state in the presidential race, that disastrous presidential race of Romney-Ryan versus Obama-McCain. Obama-McCain. Well, there's something to be said there. Obama. Oh boy, Obama-Biden. That was a slip. He also said that I wish we had a different presidential choice. Okay. Thank you, Paul Ryan. Now, we're going to talk about New York issues as we wrap up the show, so stay with us. This is, Frankly Speaking, here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Hagan, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio, wrapping things up. From a viewer, I seriously can't see how Joe Biden can be president for 4.5 more years, let alone 4 weeks. And he shouldn't be. This is not fun and games. It is dangerous to we the people in our republic. Is there a deadline for another candidate to jump in? There could be some. I don't think that's going to happen. And there's not. Listen, he's already secured the delegates to be the nominee. What happens here on out, I don't know. I mean, yes, to your question, it would probably have to be Kamala. I did see a piece that suggested if he stepped down, because he can always step down. I mean, there's no timeline for that. But if he did it before the convention, I read a piece where she could say, no, I still want to be VP, and have somebody else in there because they know that she's not popular. I don't know. I think this is all political mind games. It's a fair question. I think the Juneteenth video concerned a lot of people, and I think that's why the question is being raised. Quickly, a new poll finds a majority of voters say New York is headed in the wrong direction. You say, yeah, I could see that. That seems to be the major conversation, at least here in upstate. Well, 51% of the survey said. It's only 51%. 46% had an unfavorable view of Governor Hochul. Nearly one-third are considering leaving New York because of the political environment, and 47% of New Yorkers living in New York City suburbs consider moving. All right. Cuomo, this is from Janice Dean, in compliance with a congressional subpoena, the disgraced former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, finally arrived in Washington, D.C. to answer questions about his actions during the pandemic. In typical fashion, he opened the hearing with the familiar lies and talking points we've been hearing for 4 years. But unlike his Albany fireside chats in which he pretended to know what he was doing, Tuesday's statements are now part of the congressional record and made under oath. Cuomo's comments on the March 25, 2020 directive that sent more than 9,000 COVID-positive patients into nursing homes for 6 weeks, it wasn't his fault. He was just following orders from federal guidelines, from the federal government. But where is this federal guidance compelling state governments to pack care facilities with COVID patients? How does Cuomo explain that the majority of other states in the union did not carry out this practice? Let's be clear on this one. Other than Cuomo's former health commissioner, Howard Zucker, no doctor or health professional has ever come out in support of this direct order. But what did he do? He blamed Trump. And I remember at the time kind of having a laugh about it, because when did he adhere to any other directive from the Trump administration? But anyway, if Cuomo was following federal CDC guidelines, why did his administration do everything it could to cover up the state's total number of elderly deaths? And that is such a great point. Janice Dean has been so outspoken about this from the beginning. She lost her in-laws during that time, the nursing home decision. So, and she's been very, very outspoken. But yeah, why, if he did nothing wrong, why did they do the cover up the numbers of the total deaths? His top aide, Melissa Del Rosa, famously froze out of fear that the true numbers would be held against her by federal prosecutors. Also, can I add with Melissa Del Rosa, just to show you kind of the state of New York at a time when Cuomo had to leave because of this, well, for many reasons, but he had to resign. People saying they're sick of how New York is run. They're thinking about leaving. They don't think it's in a good direction. Polls show that Melissa Del Rosa, basically the right-hand person to Cuomo, that she would win just about any office she ran for in New York State. You remember that poll I brought to you a little bit ago? If there's one thing we know for sure about 4 years of trying to get justice and accountability for the deaths of our loved ones, Andrew Cuomo has never taken responsibility for his actions, issued apologies, or admitted mistakes. But we have the angels on our side. Well, let me take a step back. Judging by his performance, that day will never come. But we have the angels on our side, and Tuesday's sworn testimony is the beginning of Cuomo's judgment day. That is Janice Dean, a meteorologist at Fox News, was very outspoken over this. Cuomo saying today is an opportunity to actually get the truth and the facts out, and I welcome that opportunity. Right? His press conferences didn't even give him enough time to talk about these issues. Hey, by the way, you know how we've talked about campaign finance reform in New York State and how you, the taxpayer, are paying for a candidate's campaign that you may not support in any way, shape, or form, because they said it would clean up Albany? One candidate had fake donations help him get $162,000 from taxpayers. This is coming from the New York Times. They go through and show how people who donated to this campaign never donated to the campaign. Scores of New Yorkers who supposedly made small cash donations to Mr. Yin, Deo Yin, a businessman who immigrated to New York from Shanghai in the late 90s. He is the lesser known of two candidates in the Democrat primary who are challenging Ron Kim. Despite his lack of name recognition, he is one of the top recipients of public matching funds. You and I paying $162,800. All right, we are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Boy, that went fast. Thank you to everybody who joined us. Thank you for all the comments, all the waves. I really appreciate it. Our wave total hovering right around in the 20s now. Look at that, 23. Our top was 38 one time. I appreciate it. And if there's anything you missed, anything you want to weigh in on that we covered on the program today and didn't have an opportunity, it's never too late That number on the bottom of your screen is 24/7. So have a great day, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, starting at 6, for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'll see you tomorrow. I look forward to it already.